Long ago, in a time when the world was vast and unexplored, a powerful and righteous ruler set out on a journey unlike any other. His name was known far and wide, a man of strength, wisdom, and justice. He traveled from land to land, conquering not for glory, but to spread fairness among people who had forgotten what it meant to live under the light of truth. His path led him through deserts and mountains, across lands where languages differed, and the sun rose from distant horizons. But one day, his journey took him to a strange region between two massive mountains. The air there felt heavy. The wind carried whispers of fear, and the people who lived in those valleys were unlike any he had met before. They were simple folk, speaking in broken words, hardly able to communicate, but their eyes told stories of suffering. When they finally understood who he was, a man who brought justice wherever he went, they rushed to him, pleading for help. Their hands trembled, and their faces showed years of exhaustion. Blends they spoke of a terrifying menace that came from behind the mountains. Two wild nations, fierce and unstoppable, known as Yajuj and Majuj. These were not ordinary people, they were countless in number, spreading destruction like a plague wherever they went. They would raid the lands, consume everything in sight, and leave behind nothing but ruins. No army could resist them. The simple valley people lived in constant fear, unable to sleep peacefully, always waiting for the next attack that could wipe them out completely. Hearing their cries, the ruler felt their pain deeply. His heart was moved by their helplessness. He looked at the mountains that stood tall like giants before him, and an idea began to take shape in his mind. He decided that he would build a great barrier, a wall unlike anything the world had ever seen, one that would seal the passage between the mountains and protect the innocent from the forces of chaos. Bold, he gathered his men and asked the people to assist him, not with gold or silver, but with strength and unity. Together, they carried heavy blocks of iron, stacking them layer upon layer, forming a massive structure that rose high between the peaks. The sound of hammers echoed through the valley. Sparks flew as fire met metal, and the wall grew taller each day. They poured molten copper over the iron, sealing it into a solid mass that even the strongest forces could not penetrate. When it was finally complete, the wall stretched from one mountain to the other, a shimmering iron barrier that gleamed under the sun. The people stood in awe, their hearts filled with gratitude and relief. For the first time in generations, they felt safe. Behind that wall, Yajuj and Majuj could no longer reach them. They could be heard scratching and pounding from the other side, furious that their path had been blocked, but their efforts were in vain. Beng the ruler stood before the wall, his gaze firm yet humble. He knew that what had been built was not merely a barrier of iron and copper. It was a symbol of divine mercy and justice. It represented the balance between power and compassion, a reminder that, no matter how strong evil may appear, righteousness, when guided by divine wisdom, can overcome it. The people wanted to thank him, to reward him with wealth and treasures, but he refused. His voice was calm, filled with faith, as he told them that what he had done was not for reward, but as a duty entrusted to him. The strength that had made the wall possible did not come from his own might, but from the will of the one who rules over all. He knew that the barrier would stand only as long as it was meant to, that one day, when the appointed time came, it would crumble, and the nations of Yajuj and Majuj would once again be free to pour forth upon the world. As years passed, the valley flourished in peace. Children played without fear, crops grew in abundance, and the sound of laughter replaced the cries of terror. But far beyond the wall, in the hidden lands no one could reach, Yajuj and Majuj waited. Their hearts were restless, their hunger endless. They scratched at the barrier day after day, testing its strength, dreaming of the day they would be free again. Generations came and went. The story of the wall and the mighty ruler became legend, passed down in whispers from father to son, mother to child. Some began to doubt if it was ever real. Others believed that the wall still stood strong, unseen by human eyes, guarding the world from a chaos too great to imagine. Yet those who understood the deeper meaning knew that the story was not just about a wall or two wild tribes. It was a reminder that every age has its own form of corruption and darkness. Just as that righteous ruler once stood between destruction and peace, every generation must rise to guard what is good before the forces of chaos break through once again. The mighty ruler stood before the towering wall he had built, a structure of iron and molten metal gleaming beneath the fading sun. The air was still, and only the soft wind whispered between the mountains. The people who had once lived in terror now stood in peace, gazing upon the wall that had brought them safety. They smiled, cried, and fell to their knees in gratitude, for what once seemed impossible had become reality. Laird, the ruler, looked upon their faces and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His mission for now was complete. Yet, as he watched the light of the sunset reflect upon the iron surface, he knew this war was not eternal. Nothing in this world ever is. It would stand strong only for as long as it was meant to. The power that held it together did not lie in the iron or the copper, nor in his own strength. It came from a command far greater than his, one that could, with a single will, bring mountains to dust. And he walked slowly toward the base of the wall, placing his hand upon the cold metal. Beneath it, faint rumbles could be felt, the restless movements of those who had been trapped behind it. Their scratching and pounding echoed through the mountains like distant thunder. They were still there, countless and furious, clawing in anger, waiting for the moment they could once again break free. The people could not hear it, but he could, and though his heart remained steady, he understood that this wall was only a temporary mercy. Bund. He turned to the people who had gathered around him. Their voices were full of praise, their gratitude overflowing. They wanted to build temples in his honor, to shower him with gold and treasures. But he raised his hand and stopped them. His eyes were gentle, yet filled with unshakable strength. "I do not build for reward," he told them. "This wall is not mine. It is a gift of mercy. Remember that its strength does not come from me or from any man. It stands because it was meant to stand, and when the time appointed by the Creator arrives, it will fall. No iron will hold it then. No mountain will hide you from what is to come." The people listened in silence, the joy in their hearts turning to reflection. They had witnessed power beyond their understanding, the transformation of fear into peace, chaos into order. But now they were reminded that even this peace was not forever. The ruler's words settled into their hearts like seeds, reminding them of humility and faith. As night fell, torches lit the valley, and the glow of the wall shone like fire against the dark sky. The ruler climbed a small ridge to look at it one last time. From there, it stretched endlessly between the two great mountains, majestic and immovable. Stars appeared one by one, glittering above the peaks, and the sound of the wind carried a strange, almost sacred calm. Behind that wall, in the shadowy lands that no man could enter, Yajuj and Majuj stirred in frustration. Their rage was boundless. They scratched at the wall with claws and crude tools, their voices rising like a storm. Yet the barrier held firm. Sparks flew where their claws met iron, but not even a fragment broke loose. Their strength was great, but not greater than the will that had confined them. Still, Day after day, year after year, they tried. They waited. And somewhere deep inside their restless hearts a thought remained, that one day, when the appointed time came, this wall would weaken, and they would pour out once more like a flood over the earth. Laum the ruler could feel this truth, though he did not fear it. He understood that his duty had been fulfilled, to protect these people. Until the decree of the Almighty changed the course of history again. His eyes softened as he watched the torches flicker below, where families now slept peacefully for the first time in generations. He knew that every moment of peace was itself a blessing, a sign of mercy before the storm that would someday come. When he left the valley quietly the next morning, no grand procession followed him. No songs or banners waved in his honor. He preferred silence, the quiet that follows a great task completed. As he rode through the mountain pass, the first rays of dawn illuminated the wall behind him, painting it gold once more, eternal, invincible. Yet he knew that its fate was already written, just as all things in this world are written, to rise, to serve their purpose, and one day to fall. Generations would pass. Children would grow up hearing stories of the mighty wall and the ruler who built it. They would speak of him with reverence, some calling him a king, others a prophet, some doubting whether he ever truly existed. But the wall would remain, hidden in lands far beyond the reach of any man, standing guard over the chaos that waited behind it. And when the distant future arrived, when the world would again tremble with corruption, when people would turn away from truth and the earth would be filled with injustice, the time of the wall would end. It would crack, crumble, and dissolve into dust. The same unseen power that once made it strong would command it to fall. Then, from every side, the nations once trapped behind it would surge forth, countless as waves of the sea, spreading across the world, remorseless. But that time had not yet come, for now the valley slept peacefully, guarded by a wall that shimmered beneath the moonlight, a silent reminder of mercy, power, and the fragile nature of all things built in this world. The sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the valley awoke in peace. For generations, the people had lived safely behind the great wall that separated them from the unknown lands beyond. They had grown used to the calm, to the laughter of children echoing through the fields, to the hum of life, untroubled by fear. Yet far beyond those mountains, something ancient and restless had not forgotten. Run deep behind the iron barrier, in the lands untouched by human eyes, Yajuj and Majuj stirred. Their hearts had never known peace. The years of confinement had not tamed them, they had only fueled their fury. Each day they clawed at the iron, hammering, biting, scraping, their screams rising like thunder that never reached the world outside. The wall held firm, its strength unbroken. But with every passing century, their determination grew more desperate. Burned in a distant time, a man stood among his people, a messenger to remind them of the signs that would mark the end of their era. His face was filled with concern as he spoke of what lay ahead, the slow unraveling of the world's balance. He told them of a day that would come when the barrier, that great wall of mercy, would begin to weaken. It would not fall all at once, but small cracks would appear, unseen at first, and through those cracks, the whisper of chaos would return. The people listened with wide eyes, their hearts trembling. Could such a thing truly happen? For so long, the story of the wall had been nothing more than a legend to them, a tale of ancient times. Many had begun to doubt its existence altogether, thinking it a myth told to frighten children, or to remind them of the power of faith. But those who saw the wisdom in his words understood He spoke not of stone or iron, but of a deeper truth. When the world loses its balance, when arrogance replaces humility, and greed overcomes gratitude, the wall begins to crumble, not from outside, but from within. Mond far away, in lands beyond their knowledge, a small tremor passed through the mountains. The wall did not break, but a thin line appeared across its surface, almost invisible, yet real. A fragment of dust fell to the ground. Behind it, the scratching grew louder. The creatures that had waited for ages sensed the weakness. They rejoiced in their prison, howling into the darkness. The time was drawing closer, though no one outside could yet see it. For in that same era, the world began to change. Kings turned against their own people, truth became a tool for deception, and corruption spread like wildfire. The poor were crushed under the weight of greed, and the cries of the innocent were drowned by the noise of arrogance. The earth itself seemed to groan beneath the burden of injustice, and those who remembered the old prophecies whispered to one another, "Perhaps the time is near." Mend. Each generation saw more signs: floods that swept away entire lands, wars that left cities in ashes, and people who no longer cared for what was right. Yet even then, few understood that the greatest threat was not above the earth, but waiting beneath it. Turned one night, a storm rolled across the valley. Lightning cracked through the sky, illuminating the distant mountains. For a brief moment, the great wall glowed under the flash, and something strange appeared, a faint shimmer, like the reflection of fire beneath the metal. A shepherd who saw it from afar dropped to his knees, trembling. He ran back to the village and told what he had seen, but most laughed it off. Only a few believed him, whispering prayers under their breath. Blend behind that wall, the sound of tearing metal echoed faintly, as if something enormous was pushing against it. But still the barrier stood, silent and immovable to the human eye. It was not yet time. Yonder, days turned into years, and the world continued to spin deeper into chaos. The people had forgotten the warnings. They had become busy with their own desires, blind to the signs unfolding before them. The balance of the world was shifting again. Peace in some corners, destruction in others. Yet, above all, the silence behind the mountains was growing thin. Those who were spiritually aware could feel it. A heaviness in the air, a sense that something ancient was stirring. At night, they would look toward the horizon and feel their hearts tighten, as though the earth itself was whispering that the barrier's time was almost over. Bound far beyond human sight, the imprisoned nations of Yajuj and Majuj never ceased their effort. They struck the wall every day, their claws and tools chipping away bit by bit. And each time they stopped, they would say, "We will return tomorrow to finish it." But by morning, they would find the wall restored, solid once again, untouched, because they had not spoken the words that would allow it to fall. And yet, one day, when the world would reach its appointed moment, when corruption would cover the earth and the hearts of men would grow darker than ever before, they would finally speak those words without realizing their meaning. And that would be the day the wall would give way. And the sound of it breaking would not just echo through the mountains, but through the hearts of all living beings. The sky would darken, the earth would tremble, and from every elevation they would pour forth, countless, unstoppable, spreading like waves of destruction. Merest. But that time had not yet come. For now, the wall still stood, hidden beneath mist and mountain, sealed by mercy and unseen power. Yet, every tremor, every wall, every act of corruption was a whisper from the future, a sign that the end draws closer with every heartbeat of this world. The day began like any other, quiet and unremarkable. The sun rose behind the distant mountains, painting the horizon in shades of crimson and gold, But the beauty of the dawn could not hide the strange heaviness in the air. Animals were restless. Birds flew low to the ground, their cries sharp and uneasy. Even the wind seemed to carry a warning, whispering through the valleys as though it knew something the people did not. Land in the small villages scattered across the plains, life continued as usual. Merchants setting up their stalls, children chasing each other through the streets, farmers heading toward their fields. Yet somewhere deep within, an unexplainable unease tugged at their hearts. They could not see it, but beyond those vast mountains, something ancient had awakened. Bound far away, the great wall that had stood for countless generations began to tremble. The cracks that had once been invisible were now spreading, winding like veins of fire across the iron surface. Behind it, Yajuj and Majuj roared, their voices rising together in a sound that shook the earth. They had waited for this moment since the beginning of their imprisonment, and now, at last, the time had come. Plemdens for centuries, they had struck the wall every day, only to find it whole again by morning. But this day was different. As they clawed and hammered at the metal, the barrier groaned and split wider. The fire that once sealed it melted, spilling like lava onto the ground. The air grew thick with heat and ash, the sound of cracking iron echoing like thunder. Then, with a roar that seemed to tear the sky itself, the wall collapsed. The imprisoned nations poured forth like a flood. The world that had forgotten them would never forget again. They came from the shadows in countless numbers, rushing through the mountains like a storm of destruction. Their cries echoed through the valleys, their feet shook the ground, and their hunger for conquest had no end. The earth seemed to weep under their march. Rivers turned muddy, forests fell silent, and the air filled with the smoke of burning lands. And far from the chaos, people watched in disbelief as the horizon turned black. Dust and fire rose into the sky, swallowing the sun. Cities that had stood for centuries fell within hours. No army could stop them. Walls crumbled, fortresses burned, and the cries of the innocent filled the air. The powerful who once ruled the earth hid in fear, and the proud who mocked the ancient warnings now trembled. In those days, the world became unrecognizable. The balance that once held creation together was shattered. Oceans swelled, storms raged, and the stars seemed dimmer than before. People turned on one another, fighting for food and safety, yet no place remained untouched. The might of Yajuj and Majuj was not only in their numbers but in the chaos they spread wherever they went. They devoured everything, land, life, and hope itself. Amidst the despair, a small group of believers gathered, their hearts heavy but unbroken. They sought shelter in caves and hidden valleys, away from the path of destruction. They spoke little, only whispering prayers for deliverance. Their faith was their only weapon, their patience their only shield. Even as the world around them crumbled, they held on to the promise that every darkness, eventually, meets its dawn. Mondays turned to weeks and the chaos continued. The lands that once flourished became barren wastelands. The rivers that once nourished life now ran dry or red with the stains of war. And above it all, the cries of Yajuj and Majuj echoed endlessly, a haunting reminder that mankind's greatest test had begun. Tolligered. But as suddenly as it had started, the rampage began to slow. The very forces of nature seemed to turn against them. The same earth that had trembled beneath their feet began to swallow them whole. The winds howled with fury, storms gathered with unrelenting force, and the land shook with such violence that mountains split apart. It was as if the world itself could no longer bear the weight of their corruption. When those who survived watched in awe and fear as the tide turned. Yajuj and Majuj, once unstoppable, began to fall. One after another, they were consumed by what they had unleashed, a force greater than any weapon. a judgment woven into the fabric of the world. When the storm finally ceased, silence returned. The air was still. The earth, though scarred and broken, began to breathe again. Land. The survivors emerged from their hiding places, blinking against the pale light of dawn. What they saw was a world reborn yet wounded, mountains reshaped, rivers flowing anew, and the ruins of cities standing as reminders of what once was. They knelt on the ground, tears streaming down their faces, grateful to be alive. The silence felt sacred, heavy with meaning. No one could ever again deny the truth of what had happened. The story of Yajuj and Majuj was no longer a distant legend. It had become a living memory, a mark on human history, and a warning for all generations to come. The survivors told their children and grandchildren, "We saw the world end and begin again. We saw the signs and the mercy that followed." And so, as the sun rose over the renewed earth, its light fell upon lands both destroyed and reborn, a reminder that every ending carries within it a new beginning, and that even in the face of chaos, divine justice always restores the balance of the world.